Hello, welcome back to Fool Podcast. This is Spencer Cross, your host, episode 2, where we hope to dive further into The Merchant of Venice. It'll be our first episode, might be several, and we might go very, very deep. Just laughing to myself. The thing I probably like least about this podcast is the transition from hopefully beautiful music to the sound of my voice, because that's probably a jarring transition. And I apologize for that, but I do want to try and maintain the standard of every week, or every episode at least, introducing some type of classical music. That was a piece called Souvenirs of Florence from Tchaikovsky. It's a string sextet, 6-piece string orchestration, performed by the U.S. Army Band, actually. I had hoped, because of the nature of the episode, to use Mendelssohn's Gondola song, Venetian boat song, from the Songs Without Words, but I couldn't find a good public domain recording, so I used something close, and honestly, it's a great piece. You don't really need an excuse to play that piece. We'll play the full song at the end of the episode, so if there's any motivation to listen to this episode, at least use that. Anyway, talking about Merchant of Venice. I may have mentioned in the first episode, one of my focuses is something called the problem plays from William Shakespeare. And that's not a term he used, it's the term modern academics, say the last 100 years, have used to describe a set of his plays called the problem plays. And they call them that because they can't be neatly defined as comedies or tragedies. Often they're comedies, and academics say, yeah, they're comedies, but they have these dark elements, maybe very serious or grave elements, and not the same as what we would consider perhaps a black comedy in modern parlance. But I don't think there's any real problem with the plays, not to use a terrible pun, but the only problem is in the academic's view of the plays. Most of them, I'm going to focus on two, I'll say that. I'm going to focus on The Merchant of Venice and Measure for Measure as the first two. We may get to more. Depending on the academic you ask, there are other plays in this same set. Much Ado About Nothing, Timon of Athens. Some consider Hamlet in that bunch. But yeah, I don't want to fixate too much on the academic terms and definitions. I'd rather just get into the play itself. Merchant of Venice is a great play. It's wonderful. You should read it if you haven't. Hopefully my synopsis will inspire you to listen to it. And I would recommend, if you do, to read it first. I think too much of the interpretation and what scholars and theater directors, theater companies have agreed on is incorrect, especially with regard to this play. And I'll talk about my synopsis, then we'll talk about how other people view it, and hopefully you'll see the contrast and how big of a contrast there is. I've spent some time researching views of this play, at least over the last 100 years. I haven't researched it for 100 years, but I've been reviewing the work for the last 100 years, and I think people are very, very off, very off, and that includes some of the biggest names in Shakespeare scholarship. So let's talk about the synopsis, right? Some of the main characters. Antonio is the merchant of Venice. Shylock is the Jewish moneylender. Bassanio is a young suitor. He's friends with Antonio. Portia is a lady whose father had died recently. She lives in Belmont, not in Venice. And her father set up this elaborate game involving 3 treasure chests. So any suitor going to try and win her hand in marriage has to choose the correct treasure chest. Each one has an inscription. If they get correct, then they get her hand and all of her wealth that her father had left. If not, they have to swear to never woo a woman again. Okay, so the play begins with Antonio and some of his friends, some of him and Bassanio's mutual friends, and Antonio's sad. The friends try to ask why. He doesn't give a reason. The friends ask if you're in love. There are some strong hints throughout the play that Antonio is probably in love with the young Bassanio. Antonio, again, is the wealthy merchant. So Bassanio enters. Antonio cheers up immediately and is happy. Bassanio says that he's broke, he's in debt, he lives beyond his means, he's wasted his estate, and he's in debt to everybody, but most especially in debt to Antonio. But he tells him about the contest with Portia, and he says, in Belmont is a lady richly left. That's the first line he uses to describe Portia. In Belmont is a lady richly left. That's the most important thing about Portia. She's richly left. And he offers this ridiculous simile to basically ask Antonio for money, which is to say, when he was a child, he shot an arrow and lost it, but he shot another arrow in the same direction, so to venture forth, he could seek forth. So by shooting the second arrow in the same direction, he could find the second one. So I'm already in debt to you, Antonio, but could I please borrow more? It's kind of a gamble, but if I win, I'll be able to pay you back greatly. And Antonio agrees to it. Again, there are subtexts throughout that Antonio may be in love with Bassanio. So Antonio, the merchant of Venice, agrees to fund Bassanio's voyage to Belmont in hopes of winning this treasure chest game so that he can win Portia and pay back Antonio's debt. Antonio, since he's a merchant, he says, yes, all of his ships are out to sea, so he has no money that he can raise directly. And even though he's a Christian and he's against usury, he will break his tradition to favor his friend. So he's prepared at least to break his religious laws to help out a friend. So he says, try what my credit can upon the Rialto do. So go down to the Rialto and see what we can get from the moneylenders. And that's scene 1. Scene 2 shifts to Belmont. It's Portia and Nerissa. Interesting just from a kind of drama analysis view. Most of the play, most of Shakespeare overall is an iambic pentameter. Da-da, 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 da-da. It's just a way you meter phrase, dramatic phrase, like, will you go see the order of the course? But often Shakespeare will use verse. Certain characters will only speak in verse, which is like unmetered. So Portia and Nerissa speak in without meter, and often Shakespeare will use that to show like low characters that are less noble. The first line, just for example, is from Portia, by my troth, Nerissa, my little body is aweary of this great world. There's no meter, so I just point that out. I don't think there's anything super profound about Shakespeare's use of that here, but it is worth noting. So Act 1, Scene 2 is them in Belmont. They're basically talking about the rules of the contest, and they're talking a bunch of smack about all the suitors and how terrible they are and how Portia really wouldn't be comfortable or happy with any of them as her husband. At one point, Nerissa makes a comment about, but it's too bad. And Portia makes a comment that, but I of course, don't really have any say in the matter. I have to follow the rules of this game. And Nerissa makes a comment saying, well, that's not exactly true. And there's a couple other indications throughout the play that they're not necessarily going to strictly adhere to the laws of this treasure chest game. And we might talk about that more in depth in this episode. I have a theory about that I think is a little bit off the wall, but you might enjoy it. And that's pretty much scene 2. Oh, I should mention that right before the scene closes out, Nerissa says, wasn't there some young Venetian who was in the presence of this other lord who visited that that looked like a nobleman, and Portia says, "Oh yes, I believe Bassanio was his name." So she at least has him in her mind. She knew about him, and she's got the hots for him. Let's put it that way. So that's the end of scene 2. Scene 3 is a pivotal scene, already getting the action going right away. It's back in Venice. It's Bassanio and Shylock, the Jewish moneylender, in conversation about a loan to Bassanio, but in Antonio's name, so that he can furnish this voyage to Belmont for Portia's hand. And it's about 3,000 ducats for 3 months. Antonio comes on the scene and basically says, well, I'm going to have thrice times that sum 2 months before the debt will have to be called, before it's due, so no problem. We got to step back a little bit looking at the Jewish question in Venice, because this is the first ghetto in all of human history. It was in Venice. The Jews were segregated, and I haven't been there, but I've seen pictures and looked online, but you can see pictures of this area. They were segregated. They were not considered citizens. Christianity for a long, long time viewed usury as immoral, an immoral thing that you wouldn't ever loan. And that just means loaning money at any kind of interest rate. So you're going to make money just by loaning someone else money and saying, you need to pay me back at a higher rate. So for a long, long, long time in Christianity, that was considered evil. The Jews had been persecuted. The Jews had been persecuted pretty much through their entire history, and there's a lot of books on that. But just to give the somewhat nutshell, they're not viewed as citizens. They're allowed to live in the city limits as aliens, and the only profession they're allowed to do in that time in European history was to be moneylenders. There was a couple other things, but that was the main thing they were allowed to do. So they were segregated and alienated, etc. So in the play, right around this time, we'll see sort of later in the scene, it comes out that the Christians, the Venetians, by Christians in this play I just mean the Venetians, all the non-Jewish characters are Christian, nominally at least. They treat the Jews pretty awfully, and especially Antonio, his treatment of Shylock, the moneylender, is very bad. They curse him, they mock him, they make fun of his religion, they spit on him. Shylock says that Antonio had lent money at no interest, which of course was legal, but from Shylock's perspective, it's sort of screwing them over, because that's their only means of livelihood, right? So Bassanio and Shylock are talking. Antonio comes over. Things get a little bit heated, but keep in mind the background with how Christians and Venetians had treated Jews in general, how Jews are segregated, how they're viewed as less than even really second-class, more like third-class citizens, and especially with a view to Antonio's treatment of Shylock in specific. So Shylock was prepared to make the loan, but they get in sort of a heated argument, and Shylock makes a proposition that, okay, I'll loan you this money, and you claim that you'll be able to pay it no problem, but if you can't, then I'm going to take a pound of your flesh. Now, this is obviously a big reason why people remember this play, and people use that term a lot to generally use the idea of a super punitive loan, whether it's the IMF in some people's view, any kind of finance over human life concept. They say, why don't you come get your pound of flesh? It's been used politically for a long time, at least the 1970s. But that's at least where it comes from. For what it's worth in this scene, once Shylock raises the issue of the pound of flesh, and it seems like Antonio is going to go for it, Bassanio says, hey, wait a minute, I would rather just dwell on my necessity. You don't need to do that for me. So to his credit, he tries to stop that right at the beginning. My argument is mostly that the Venetians in this play are atrocious people. They're really terrible. Pretty much, if you're going to say villains, they're the villains in the play in terms of how they value human life, how they treat other characters, and the fact that they don't really have any kind of commitment to principles besides principles of selfishness or their own advancement. They're duplicitous. They do not commit to anything. They don't really honor any principle. And each character is sort of given many chances to show some kind of principle, and they fail every time. So that being said, I do try to look out and give credit where credit's due. In this case, Bassanio did try and be the rational person. But definitely keep that in mind. Even with how Antonio had treated Shylock up to this point, before this agreement, he still was prepared to make the loan, but then things got heated. Shylock brought up the terrible treatment by Antonio, and then Antonio was in a rage. Shylock got upset too, and then that's when the pound of flesh agreement came on board as what we'll see as a major plot device. So that's pretty much the end of Act 1, Scene 3, and really the end of Act 1. All right, Act 2, back in Belmont, Portia, Nerissa, and a fun character. I don't know, fun's not the best word, but the Prince of Morocco. Fun because of how he functions as a plot device. He's from Northern Africa, obviously, so he's dark-skinned. He seems like a brave and bold person. He's the first person in the play who wants to accept the terms of the treasure chest game, and go for a shot. And this is one of the first instances we have of Portia being a racist. And I'm not one of those people who is going to apply our modern standard of, let's say, let's go back and look at all these plays and see how this and that were racist, or, whatever. I don't think that's a very useful thing to do, to apply modern moral standards to previous. So this isn't any kind of comment on Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is not a racist. But it's funny in this play that Portia definitely is a racist. So correction, it's actually in Act 1, Scene 2, the first scene with Portia and Nerissa, where they talk about the Prince of Morocco coming. That's the first indication we have, where she says something to the effect of, if he had the complexion of the devil and the constitution or the character of a saint, I would rather he shrive me than wive me. Shrive meaning marry. I would rather he perform my marriage than actually marry me. So that was the first indication. This first scene in Act 2 is basically them setting up the point that Prince of Morocco is going to take the challenge. In his speech, he talks about the fact that he's from a warm climate, and he would compare someone from a icy northern climate, the redness of our blood, basically comparing the content of their character, to make a comment that, you shouldn't judge me by the color of my skin. Of course, Portia absolutely does, but we'll come back to that when it gets to when we actually get to the treasure chest game in a couple scenes. So that's Act 2, Scene 1. Act 2, Scene 2 is funny. Often in Shakespeare plays, you get something that scholars like to describe as the relationship of high comedy and low comedy. High comedy being more noble or ostensibly civilized comedy, and low comedy being more for the common folk, lowbrow humor kind of thing. So this scene, Act 2, Scene 2, on the surface is kind of funny. It's a character named Lancelot Gobbo. He's Shylock's servant, and he's talking about how, basically imagine a devil on his shoulder and an angel on his shoulder. The devil's telling him to leave the service of Shylock, and the angel's saying, no, you have an honor to uphold, to serve him. But it's worth noting that from Lancelot Gobbo's own mind, he thinks it's the fiend or the devil telling him to leave, that it would be, in his mind at least, a dishonorable thing to do. So while he's talking to himself in a funny monologue, also unmetered verse monologue, so again, signifying a low comedy or low character, Lancelot Gobbo's father comes, who is blind. they call him sand or gravel blind, comes looking for his son or Shylock's house because he wants to give a gift to Shylock. There's some fish or something. So Lancelot Gobbo decides to play deceptions on his father and pretend that he's not Gobbo, give him messed up directions, and pretend that he's actually a master, not a servant. So even on, this is a minor character, but even on this level, all the Venetians are duplicitous, and they're just not good characters. Lancelot Gobbo also, at this point, indicates that he's not being paid well, and he is not eating well under the service of Shylock, but he wants to leave the service to go work for Bassanio, and he tries to get his father to help him do that. So that's the end of that scene. Act 2, Scene 3 is very short. It's Shylock's house, Shylock's daughter, and Lancelot Gobbo. Lancelot telling Jessica, the daughter, that he's going to be leaving. Jessica saying, I'm sorry you're going to go because you at least were kind of funny. But once you see this young man named Lorenzo at Bassanio's house, a friend of Bassanio, give him this letter, Lancelot leaves. Jessica has a little aside to herself, basically saying she wants to leave her father and marry this Christian Lorenzo, who's Bassanio's friend. So that's Act 2, Scene 3. Act 2, Scene 4 is also in Venice. It's Lancelot running into some of Bassanio's hanger-on friends, giving Lorenzo the note from Jessica, saying he's going to enter Bassanio's service, and then Lorenzo telling the buddies that Jessica is writing to say this is how she's going to escape, how she wants to marry him, and how she's going to take a bunch of her father's money with her. Scene 5 is back at Shylock's house. Lancelot has returned. Jessica's there. Shylock's there. It's basically Shylock just saying, I'm going to lock up the house when I leave. I need to go meet with Bassanio about this new transfer of servants. And don't leave. Watch out for my money. Scene 6 is still Venice. It's the same group of Bassanio's friends outside. They have their masks on. They're going to a revel. They go grab Jessica from Shylock's house, and they abscond with a bunch of his money. Antonio comes looking for them because Bassanio is going to be traveling to Belmont right then, and that's pretty much that scene. A lot of these scenes around this part of Act 2 are somewhat throwaways. They're not that significant for the development of the plot, but we'll see how they come into play in just a moment. Okay, Scene 7 is back in Belmont. The Prince of Morocco, they've had dinner. He's ready to try his hand at the chess game, and this is the first time we get the descriptions of the chest, which we'll probably come to at the end. I'm going to do kind of an appendix, I think, on the chess game, but we have to go through the whole play first, kind of look at some major motives before we can get back to that. So 3 chests, one's gold, one's silver, and one's lead. The first gold one says, the inscription on it says, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." The silver says, "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves." And the lead chest says, "Who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath." So the prince chooses gold, which is in line with his character. He's a bold, he's not a very wise person. Doesn't seem like there's not a lot of indications for that. He's sort of a bold braggart. He's bragging. Earlier on, he bragged about how many people he'd killed and how many virgins he'd been with and how much wealth he had, that kind of thing. Kind of some tropey stereotypes. But he chose the gold one, the one with the nice appearances, and the one with the inscription, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." Within that, there's a description. So he opens it. There's a picture of carrion death. This is the description. "Oh hell, what have we here?" This is Morocco. "A carrion death, within whose empty eye there's a written scroll. I'll read the writing." Here's the writing. "All that glisters is not gold. Often you have heard that told. Many a man his life hath sold, but my outside to behold. Gilded tombs do worms enfold. Had you been as wise as bold, young in limbs, in judgment old, your answer had not been inscrolled. Fare you well, your suit is cold." I only bring this up now because looking back to some of the things he'd said in the first scene where he was bragging about his wiles and comparing the fact that he's from a warm climate, comparing it to any northern born where icicles flow, where icicles are, that, compare their blood and see who is the more virtuous, right? Making this comparison like hot and cold climates. So at the end of this, your answer had not been inscrolled, fare you well, your suit is cold. I think, and we'll get to this a lot more later, is a little burn to him, a little kind of F you, to say, look, you think you had any kind of chance? I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. I think that Portia and her servant Nerissa probably fixed this chess game, despite all the pledges throughout the play that, oh no, this was my father's dying wish, and it was so clever, and we have to abide by this, and only the virtuous person would be able to choose correctly. Where, if that were true, that would go against the whole thrust of the play, which is that nothing is equal. There are no kind of even odds. It's almost nothing but inequality, especially in relation to the Christian Venetians, so-called Christian Venetians, and the Jews. And somewhat ironic that they use another foreigner, someone from Belmont, to kind of highlight that point, right? And yeah, we'll get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But that's the end. Morocco doesn't get Portia, obviously, so he leaves. And that's pretty much Act 2, Scene 7. Okay, Act 2, Scene 8 is back in Venice. Kind of a sad and somewhat intense scene. A couple of Bassanio's friends, Salarino and Solanio, are talking about how Shylock went to the Duke because he found out that Jessica had left and absconded with a bunch of his money with a Christian. So, again, always keep in mind the history, right? Jews in the ghetto, the so-called Christian Venetian treatment of Jews and Shylock in particular, and then know that Shylock finds out his daughter, who he loved and was overprotective of and all that, sure, but loved his daughter. She left with a bunch of his money, which is also, keep in mind, his livelihood, and was seen with a Christian who was friends with Bassanio. So that obviously is pretty messed up and would affect you. He was running around the streets, Shylock was, somewhat hysterical, saying, "My daughter, my ducats, where's my money, my daughter?" And according to the scene, a bunch of all the Venetian boys were following him, sort of chanting after him. It's not entirely clear if it's positive or negative. It sounds kind of negative, though, just based on the overall context of the play, that it was they were kind of teasing him for that. They also find out that there was strong rumors that one of Antonio's ships was lost. It was wrecked at sea or something, but it was lost. So that's a little bit of a foreshadowing of something potentially happening in the play. And that's Scene 8. Okay, Act 2, Scene 9 is where the second suitor comes to try the chess game. His name's the Prince of Aragon. The play doesn't give any real clue as to who he is or what he's all about. We don't get any real clues like we did with the Prince of Morocco. But the prince comes, he chooses silver, which, as you might remember, is "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves." He's wrong. There's another inscription, which is a rhyme. He says he'll leave. The only things I should point out is at the beginning, right at the beginning of the scene, Nerissa says, "Quick, quick, I pray thee, draw the curtain straight. The Prince of Aragon hath taken his oath and comes to his election presently." So they will, for some reason, they needed to make a very quick adjustment of the curtain, which might imply some sort of tampering or adjustment of the chess themselves. At the end, or towards the end of the scene, Portia says, "Come draw the curtain," Nerissa, after Prince Aragon left, which might indicate as well. It's just a small indication. We'll talk more about it later. And then they get word, Portia and Nerissa get word that a young Venetian nobleman, most likely Bassanio, has come with rich gifts to most likely try his hand at it as well. Right after Aragon leaves, Portia says, "Thus hath the candle singed the moth. Oh, these deliberate fools, when they do choose, they have the wisdom by their wit to lose." And that is the end of Act 2. Okay, Act 3, Scene 1. This is a pivotal scene, very important to read, and I think it's a pivotal scene with respect to the rest of the play. Starts off with Salanio and Salarino, two of Bassanio's friends, talking about they heard of another ship, a more confirmed report that another one of Antonio's ships is probably lost at sea or crashed on some islands or something. So that's significant. Then Shylock enters, still upset, obviously, about his daughter's departure, and he sees two of Bassanio's friends. He says, Shylock says, "You knew none so well as you, of my daughter's flight." Salarino says, "That's certain. I, for my part, knew the tailor that made the wings she flew withal." So it goes on a little bit, but they're basically taunting this guy, saying, "Yeah, of course we knew them," basically indicating they were supporting her daughter's flight. And then they say, Shylock says, "I say my daughter is my flesh and blood." Salarino says, "There is more difference between thy flesh and hers than between jet and ivory, more between your bloods than there is between red wine and Rhenish." And then they ask if they had heard about Antonio's loss at sea. So they're, again, thinking from Shylock's perspective, everything historical, everything Antonio's done, and then he'd made this bargain with Antonio for the debt, for the bond, and now his daughter leaves with a Christian. Townspeople are taunting him for it. He runs into Bassanio's friends. They're taunting him for it as well, saying she's not even really your daughter. She's not even really your blood because of your belief systems and what you hold dear. Then Bassanio's friends, the same scene, they say, "Well, you're not really going to, you heard about Antonio's loss of his ship, but you're not really going to follow through this bond, right? What value would you have for that?" And this is one of the most poignant scenes, most poignant monologues in the whole play. It's a rather famous monologue. I'm going to read part of it, but I'm not a great reciter, so I'm not going to try and butcher too much of it. But Salarino says, "Why, I'm sure if he forfeit, thou will not take his flesh. What's that good for?" Shylock says, "To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge." Keep in mind what he's gone through, though, right? "He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heeded mine enemies. And what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you and the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be by a Christian example? Why, revenge. The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction." So that's a significant, it's a significant monologue. It's well known, but it's important to bring up in the context of this discussion because it's one of the things these modern scholars use to say it's a problem. If they're viewing the play as a comedy, which it's technically billed as a comedy, of course, and it's been viewed as a comedy for a long time, and they say, yeah, but this is an element that doesn't really fit, right? It's not very convenient if the modern theory says that Shylock is the villain, and I disagree with that. But it's hard when the villain makes this beautiful, poignant speech reminding us of his humanity, reminding us of what most people will know if they think about it. If they just take a moment to think about all the events. Some of it is historical. You need to have some historical background of the ghetto and all that, and the plight of Jews in human history. But even just based on the actions in the play, you think, yeah, this character is a human being. You know, do they not bleed? Do they not laugh? All those things. So this is one of the core elements of this modern argument, silly argument of a problem play, to say, well, it's a comedy, but then there are these really dark or heavy elements, right? Very dramatic and very it's almost like, I mean, it's reminiscent of some elements of, say, like a Dr. King speech, Dr. Martin Luther King, reminding you of this person's humanity. And when you're reminded of their humanity, it's hard to view them as the villain that many people do. And we'll see with the results of Act 4 in a little bit here what happens to Shylock when we have that humanity in mind. So the last part of the scene, this is Act 3, Scene 1. Tubal, fellow Jew and friend of Shylock, comes there. They talk about if they'd seen Shylock's daughter. Says they haven't. Shylock is sort of just unloading on his friend Tubal about everything he'd lost. At one point he says, Tubal says he'd heard some news from them abroad, the fact that Jessica and Lorenzo had been seen wasting money at a very fast pace, including a ring, and Shylock reveals that it was a turquoise ring that he had given his wife, Leia, before they were married. And he says, I would not have given it for a wilderness of monkeys. So again, a further sort of sub-point reminding you of this character's humanity. He had a wife he loved, and as much as it's easy to stereotype him as some sort of money-loving meme of a character, he's saying there's this one specific ring that it's worth more to him than any money, right? It's a further reminder to the audience, the thinking audience, that, hey, this is a human being with a fundamental worth of dignity here. So that's the end of Scene 1, very pivotal scene. All right, Scene 2 in Act 3 is kind of ridiculous. It's, I'd say, melodramatic, almost like a soap opera in relation to my view of the play. It's when Bassanio finally comes forward to choose the casket. There's some mention of, well, why don't you wait a while? I'd rather have Portia says, why don't you wait a while? Let's do it after dinner or something. Try the chests. I'd rather just enjoy this time of potential when you might be my husband. And they have some discussion of, oh, well, I wish I could just tell you, but they say, oh, I can't. Portia asks that one of her servants sing a song while he makes his decision. Some commenters have noted that the song, each line of the song that's sung ends in a word that rhymes with lead. That's a small point, but it's interesting to point out. The only notes, Bassanio doesn't say that he reads the inscriptions. It just, one of the notes says they sing a song whilst Bassanio comments on the caskets to himself. He does talk about it a little bit, but there's no mention that he's paying attention to the inscriptions on the casket. The only indication is that he's looking at the materials of the caskets himself, so gold, silver, and lead. He chooses lead for the plainness of it. The first thing he says is, so may the outward shows be least themselves, which, honestly, the idea that he would choose the correct one based on any virtue of his character is a very hard pill to swallow for me. Again, we'll talk more about the caskets at the end. But the fact that he comes to that conclusion when you look at the actions of his character and what he values as far as appearance, how he'd chosen to live his life, the fact that he's gambling on this whole thing, using someone else's money. So the inscription is, he must give in hazard all he hath for lead, when that's absurd. In the real play, the real actions of the play, Bassanio risks nothing except sort of putting his friend out a little more, when most reasonable people would assume that there's at least some sort of infatuation from Antonio's end to Bassanio. So that's just kind of funny to point out. The scene is almost absurd. It's very lovey-dovey. It's almost like a soap opera, and funny for that reason. The modern interpretation that views Shylock as the villain and Portia and Bassanio as the heroes, frankly, it's an absurd view. I I think people just haven't thought too deeply about it. a lot of it is they'll repeat sort of the academic line on a play like this. They'll say, oh, well, this is what people think it is, so I'll just kind of repeat that. Maybe they'll do some specific sub-analysis, or they'll do some modern sort of liberal arts interpretation of like a psychoanalytic view of Hamlet or some garbage like that. Stuff that's really just not that interesting. It's more things that are interesting for someone's like career path. Like if a psychoanalyst wanted to do it, it might be interesting for psychoanalysis, but it's not. You're not really shedding any new light on Shakespeare, on the content of his plays, which is the bulk of what I think you need to look at. And a big part of the reason I'm choosing to go back into the humanities field is to hopefully to try and consciously raise some of that standard. So let's see what else is in this scene. Oh yeah, so the second part of this Act 3, Scene 2 is also absurd depending on how you view the play overall. It's one of Bassanio's friends, I think Lorenzo, comes with a letter from Antonio saying, hey, my ship's all failed and I'm about to die. I'll read his note in a moment, but then that's the first indication that Bassanio gives to Portia saying, oh, hey, by the way, I'm deeply in debt and my buddy staked his life on me being able to furnish, new outfits and this voyage out here for me to try this game. And I probably should go back and help out if I can. And Portia says, oh, of course, how much is it? How much? Oh, 3,000 ducats, of course. Pay double that or triple that and times 3 and take all this money and do what you have to do. Here's the letter, though, from Antonio to Bassanio. Sweet Bassanio, my ships have all miscarried. My creditors grow cruel. My estate is very low. My bond to the Jew is forfeit. And since, in paying it, it is impossible I should live, all debts are cleared between you and I, if I might but see you at my death. Notwithstanding, use your pleasure. If your love do not persuade you to come, let not my letter. Now that's a infatuated letter. Sorry. And it's not a big point to me. I point out because it kind of helps you understand those characters' motivations a little bit better. He's taking time out. He's going to die pretty soon. His other creditors, the ones that had staked his voyages, right? Those are sort of a deeper level of creditor to him, are pissed off. And he says, I'll forgive you everything if you just come to see me before I die. But if your love do not persuade you, then don't worry about this letter. I mean, that's kind of it's a low blow, you could say. And so, of course, Portia wants him to go immediately as a sign of her love, etc. And, of course, he's going to go right away. Okay, Act 3, Scene 3, also, depending on your view, I would say is fatalistically absurd. It's Shylock and Antonio basically talking about the debt and the fact that it's forfeit, or will be forfeit. Shylock saying, I will have my bond. I will not listen to pleas for mercy or justice from you. And then a couple at least, Salarino, I guess. A couple of Bassanio's friends kind of egging on Shylock and saying, just cursing him and saying, you're a jerk. At the end, Antonio says, the Duke cannot deny the course of law, for the commodity that strangers have with us in Venice, if it be denied, 'twill much impeach the justice of the state, since that the trade and profit of the city consisteth of all nations. That's interesting just because Venice was a huge empire at that time. They sort of took over from Rome and, decently before Britain came on the scene. But they were an imperial culture, and that is interesting to note. Then Antonio says, therefore go. These griefs and losses have so baited me that I shall hardly spare a pound of flesh tomorrow on my bloody creditor. Well, jailer, on. Pray God, Bassanio come to see me pay his debt, and then I care not. So he's about to die, and he's saying he cares more that Bassanio comes to see him die for Bassanio. Right, again, indication of his infatuation. And that's the end of Scene 3. Okay, moving right along. Act 3, Scene 4 is basically Portia and Nerissa telling Jessica and Lorenzo they're going to be leaving and to just watch our house while we go, because we're going to go over to my friar relative's place down the way, and we're going to wait in, holy prayer for our husband's trip. Then Portia and Nerissa leave. Portia tells Nerissa, we're actually going to go get disguises. We're going to go pretend to be dudes and go into Venice. I don't think they say much beyond that, but that's basically the scene. Scene 5, depending on your view, of course, this is a major nutshell summation I'm going through. Act 3, Scene 5 is kind of a throwaway. It's just Lancelot and Jessica and Lorenzo talking. There's some jokes. There's some funny things in there, but it's nothing really significant to plot development, so we're gonna skip it. And that is the end of Act 3. Act 4 is the courtroom scene, pivotal scene. The Duke of Venice, Shylock, Antonio. The Duke saying, "I'm sorry, Antonio, you're going up against a stony adversary." And basically the bulk thread of development is everyone trying to get Shylock to forfeit the bond, to say, would you please take money? The due date's long past at this point. This is just the trial where Shylock is supposed to take the pound of flesh from Antonio, and everyone is trying to get Shylock to say, don't do that, take some money as compensation. And Shylock's saying no. It's worth pointing out, not that the contract was a good idea at any point, right? I tried to give some explanation for each character's motives for the bond. Obviously, the bond is messed up. But from a legal perspective, this sounds kind of messed up to say, they both agreed to it, right? It was a contract, and one side forfeit, and now the other side is going to collect. Again, I'm not in any way advocating bloodshed or death. If you're taking a pound of flesh off somebody, that's going to probably end up in death, but is worth noticing and pointing out that it was a contract that both sides agreed to. And again, there's a lot of motives for why they did, but just to point that out. So Bassanio is there, and he presents money to Shylock, and on behalf of his new wife, Portia, to say, will you please take this money instead? It's multiple times more money than the initial bond, and Shylock says no. The Duke says, we're expecting word from this learned judge, Bellario, I think, and we're waiting on final word from him. Otherwise, the Duke says, I'm basically bound to have this bond be fulfilled. A letter comes in from Bellario saying, I'm sorry I couldn't make it, but I have these replacements here that are super skilled in the law, and please accept them as my replacements. Lo and behold, it's Portia and Nerissa. Obviously, there's no indication in the play that these two characters are skilled in law, are lawyers at all. Most likely, 98% likelihood that they're committing a pretty serious legal fraud here by this action, posing, as imposters for lawyers in this case. But the Duke admits them. They're women dressed as men. It's a common Shakespeare theme. It's fine from a comedic or a stage direction standpoint. But in more historical dramatic terms, they're committing a pretty serious legal fraud. At this point, as much as I rail on Portia for being an awful human being, in her defense, she does ask and argue for Shylock to show mercy, which would have been a good solution at this point, right? That's not the direction of the play. It would have been a nice sort of dialogue of cultures kind of point, right? Forgiveness, the Jewish character sort of out-Christianing the Christian characters in the play. That would have been more of a comedic thrust. He chooses not to. Again, keep in mind everything leading up to his motivations historically and personally. But it is worth pointing out that Portia, to her credit, does try and urge mercy, which Shylock refuses. At this point, Portia asks if Antonio has any last words. He says, "But little, I am armed and well prepared. Give me your hand, Bassanio, fare you well. Grieve not that I am fallen to this for you, for herein fortune shows herself more kind than is her custom. It is still her use to let the wretched man outlive his wealth," etc., etc. So he's mostly just concerned with letting Bassanio know that he's about to die for him. Bassanio, genius that he is, replies immediately with, "Antonio, I'm married to a wife which is as dear to me as life itself." Keep in mind, he married her roughly a day before this. "I'm married to a wife which is as dear to me as life itself. But life itself, my wife, and all the world are not with me esteemed above thy life. I would lose all, I sacrifice them all, here to this devil to deliver you." Remember, his wife is right there, and he doesn't know that, but of course, funny from a audience perspective. Now, this is where the play turns, the verdict turns a little bit, because Portia brings out a legalism. Remember that she's not a lawyer at all, not qualified as a lawyer or to practice law, but she says, "Well, wait a minute. They're just about to cut off the flesh." And she says, "Wait a minute. There's nothing in the contract that says you can take a jot of blood. And it doesn't say anything about you taking more or less than a pound of flesh. So go ahead, but just make sure that you only cut exactly 1 pound of flesh and no blood." Which honestly is a garbage solution. A lot of the modern people say this is this great discovery, and people say Portia is this noble heroine who saves the day. She's like the real protagonist of the play, because she leads some of the crucial salvation aspects of it, which I think is silly, to say the least. So obviously that wasn't in the bond at all, but she's kind of going above and beyond. Modern audiences might say she's being extra, to use a modern phrase, excuse me. But then Shylock says, "Okay, fine, I'll just take the money. I'll take the money now." And they say, "Oh, no, you said you wanted the law, you wanted the execution, you wanted the pound, so you're going to take it." And he says, "No, fine, I won't take that even." And then Portia says, "Well, wait a minute," because he's going to leave. She says, "No, there's an extra thing we need to account for, because Venetian law says that if any alien was to try for the life, to try to take a Venetian's life, then we need to punish them according to these prospects." It's, of course, interesting to point out that this law in defense of Venetians against foreigners comes from someone from Belmont who is pretending to be a lawyer, right? So it's absurd on many levels. So the punishment for attempting the life of a Venetian citizen is that half of his goods, of his wealth, go to the person he tried to take. So half of his wealth will go to Antonio, the other half will go to the state of Venice, and the Duke will have the ability to pardon the life, because we're going to kill you unless the Duke pardons you. So the Duke in the play immediately pardons him. So Antonio asks that the city give up its claim on the one half of his goods, so that Antonio can use the half given to him that he wants to give to Lorenzo, the friend of Bassanio and him that took Jessica from Shylock, on 2 conditions, however: that Shylock convert to Christianity, and that upon his death, all of his goods go to Lorenzo and Jessica, his son-in-law and daughter, I suppose. So just to recap, everything taken from Shylock throughout, before this play, but really during this play. I mean, think about the history, of course. Where he lives in the ghetto, first ghetto ever. His dignity, because he's cursed, spit upon, ridiculed, mocked, all that. His daughter is stolen from him, from friends of Bassanio and Antonio. A lot of his property was stolen initially from his daughter. He made a legal contract with a Venetian, which he won, right? He didn't default. The other person defaulted, but he still lost because a foreigner who was not a lawyer pulled some legal, honestly garbage legal tricks on him that ended up in the the remaining half of his fortune to be gone, to be forfeit to Antonio, and then to be forced converted to Christianity. So just think about all those things, all the actions in this person, and try to imagine a situation where modern scholars will still tell you that this person is the villain. And again, he's not free from blame, right? He did participate in the bond and all that. But look at the actions instead of all of the ostensible Christian Venetians and compare those and look at who the villain is, right? And then think about, is this really a comedy or is this something else? I would say, I think it's a tragedy wrapped in a comedy. There's a European author named Boccaccio. He wrote something called the Decameron. There's other authors of his similar vein. It's a Renaissance style of writing. And I'd urge you to check out the Decameron. It's 100 stories told over 10 days. And they're basically funny stories that are really messed up the more you think about it. And if you think about the larger context of the Decameron, it's happening during the Black Death in Italy. And these wealthy people are telling the tales. Everyone's dying. They're looking over the River Arno into Florence in the destruction, kind of bringing us back to this, the music we started and we'll end this podcast on. They're looking and watching the death, and they're free from it, and they're telling these stories that are hilarious, but they're also these stories with terrible morals the more you think about them. And then you kind of think about the moral decay of Europe. Not in some right-wing Christian view that sin caused this evil of a plague, but if you think about it a little bit more from sort of the cultural or the humanitarian view of the history of it, that the overall decay of society, science, right, medical advancements, all those things, all that decay in society that has always led to plague type conditions in human civilizations, then it makes a little more sense. And the fact that this play is set in Venice, all those factors kind of, I hope, would inspire you to reflect on, is this play really a comedy? Should we really be laughing at this legalistic seeming solution, and this awful, awful treatment of Shylock? Can we really say that he's the villain? I mean, that is such a common thing. And a few at least, modern authors have even gone so far as to say that this play should be banned because it's anti-Semitic, because Shylock is such a trope for Jewish stereotypes. And that's insane, I think. If you see him as the victim, then it is, I would say, and this is where my views are perhaps considered radical, it's a pro-Semitic play. Because if you look at the overall context, this guy is just screwed out of everything. He's just trying to make a buck. He is not free, right? He's not free from guilt for some of the actions in this play. He did go along. He made this messed up bond, right? But it was agreed to. So there's many layers, but overall, to say that it's a comedy with dark elements and therefore a problem play, I think people just haven't thought about the play deep enough. So that's, let's finish up the play. That's just, we're still in Act 4. So let's go ahead and finish this whole thing out. All right, yeah, so I forgot. At the end of, we're still in Act 4, at the end of Scene 1, after the trial, they're kind of chatting. Antonio, Bassanio, and then Portia and Nerissa still in men's lawyers' outfits. Some people are urging, I think it's Antonio, they're urging that Bassanio give some kind of token to the judges for helping them out so much, right? I forgot to mention this earlier, but Portia and Nerissa also got married to one of Bassanio's buddies. Is not really important at all in the play, but I should note it. So Portia and Nerissa both gave their new husbands these rings and said, "Oh, let this be our first pledge of our love, and promise that you'll never take this off as a sign of love to me." Right. So fast forward back to this scene. People are urging that Bassanio give him the ring, and Portia's kind of messing around with Bassanio a little bit, saying, "Oh, if you want to give me something, why not give me that ring on your finger?" And Bassanio says, "No, I'm sorry, I can't." And Portia says, "Oh, well, you want me to beg of you, but then you're going to tell me what I can beg for, and forget it. I'm leaving you. Forget you, guy." But she's she's upset, but she's prepared to leave without the ring, and it seems like it's fine. But then Antonio comes out, this guy, and he says, so the girl's just left, and he says, "My lord Bassanio, let him have the ring. Let his deservings and my love withal be valued against your wife's commandment." Right? So he's trying to drive a little wedge in there, even though his probable love, Bassanio is already married. So then Bassanio gives the rings to his buddy Gratiano and says, "Oh, take it to the lawyers," right? So he was going to get off. Bassanio was going to get off by not having to give up his ring, but Antonio comes in there with a little underhanded move there, and that's the end of scene 1. Scene 2 is really short. It's just Gratiano giving the ring to Portia. All right, so I take that back. Act 5 is pretty much just the resolution of the fact that Antonio came back with Bassanio, so they introduced them to Portia and Nerissa, the resolution of the rings thing. And from the standpoint of a comedy, I mean, it kind of makes sense. You have these just silly, almost like sitcom style, comedic little situations, right? Where Portia and Nerissa use wordplay to talk about, I have the ring, and I got it from the doctor. And Nerissa says, "Oh, I got it from the lawyer." Nerissa says, "Oh, I got it from the lawyer's clerk, and I had it from lying with them." But really, they're talking about they just lied with themselves because they were that person. So they're just situational comedy type elements. They're fun ways to sort of wrap up the play. And they would be elements conducive to viewing the play as a comedy, but really, if you think back to what I was just saying, where it's a tragedy wrapped in a comedy, and you got to think too, Shakespeare, I think their best estimate is that they first debuted this in 1597, give or take a year or two. On the earlier sort of, say the first third of Shakespeare's plays, as far as they can tell. And dealing with a population, you think people are racist now. We're pretty racist back then. So it's one of those, it's at least subversive and subtle. If my hypothesis is correct, then it would have to show Shakespeare was extremely smart, which that's something I hope to elucidate through further episodes, right? Is that this man, is the great thing about the humanities field, right? There's so much depth. You look at these great authors, these great composers, say of classical music, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. There's so many layers. Think about even a good film you can think of that you go back, you watch it again. There's more layers. I think the great classical writers and composers, there's that, but to a much greater depth. So I hope to inspire you to investigate those things. Shakespeare is a great place to start. It's English language, and he definitely has the most layers to it. So another episode, I'm not going to have time. This episode here is to go through some of the language. I might append it or something, but to look at, say you take the simple hypothesis of, okay, this is just a comedy, and maybe Shylock is the villain, and maybe the Christians are the heroes, and this is just playing to a dumb English 16th century audience. I don't think so. I don't think that's true. I think Shakespeare's concepts, his views of mankind, his depth of compositional creation lends itself more to the hypothesis that this guy was super genius and wrote with so many layers. So if you take the two hypotheses, say the simple view, the modern view, that let's say, and I used it recently in a college paper to say it's anti-Semitic versus pro-Semitic. I think the play is a pro-Semitic play. because Shylock is the victim. He's the victim in all these things, and the Christians are the perpetrators of that set of wrongs to that society and this person in general. And they're sort of laughing and taunting and just celebrating at the expense of this person they just screwed over, right? So take those two hypotheses in view, then look back using some what I would call more advanced literary analysis to look at any individual couplet or paragraph or scene, monologue, and look at how many layers of depth does each hypothesis yield to you, right? And that's a way you can say, well, maybe my hypothesis is wrong. Maybe it is a simple view. Maybe Shylock is the villain. And if so, okay, fine. But if you take the advanced view, look at the literary analysis, any individual part, and say, can you draw out one or two or three more layers of potential irony from that element, then I think then you kind of circle back to the question of how smart was Shakespeare? Was he a super genius that we're not even close to getting to understanding him? And I think that's the more likely case. And I think that's more likely the problem with academia, that the standards have just got so low. And looking back at a lot of the writings in this play, people in, say, the 19th century, they had a better view of this play. They viewed it with more nuance and complexity. And they didn't write in simple terms, but more people shared my view 100, 150 years ago, from what I can tell. So let me briefly tease you before we go with the treasure chest concept, because hopefully the play is fresh in your mind. And when you imagine what Portia was capable of, remember that she was racist. Remember that she was prepared to commit legal fraud as an alien citizen to Venice. She was actually risking a lot to do that. What is she capable of? She was prepared to do that for what, right? For her husband, for this. She didn't know the backstory with Antonio and all that, right? So you give her credit, give her the benefit of the doubt. But she was prepared to do that for her husband, in her view, right? So thinking positively. Now think, was she capable of committing fraud with the treasure chest game in order to ensure that she got the person that she loved, in her estimation, Bassanio? Was she prepared to do that? I think it's definitely a possibility. You can look back at the fact that if you think that the inscription in the Prince of Morocco's note was a jab, kind of a FU little statement to the Prince of Morocco, to say, how dare you think you would ever have a chance of attaining me, right? If they fixed it. There was the little stage movements where they're shutting the curtains right away, or telling the Prince of Morocco, hey, yeah, we can do the game, but let's wait till after dinner, right? There's enough potential leeway for there to be, stage direction level fraud, which is a minor point. Prince Aragon, we're not given a lot of detail on. He chooses silver. And Bassanio chooses lead. If we take the earlier simple hypothesis, right, and say that Bassanio is a noble character, even though, please tell me how this guy's a noble character. Tell me what he did at all. Then you could say, well, he chose the non-obvious, ironic choice of lead, right? The valueless thing having value. The going away from worldly values to choose something noble in content, which there's an argument for that. Then we layer on this discussion the concept of, is there a poetic truth to the inscriptions? Does that have some sort of supernatural or poetic truth relative to the value of the people choosing the chests versus the outcome of the chests? So let's look back at the inscriptions real quick. Okay, so gold. The inscription is, who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire. Right? And Morocco was foolhardy. he was a braggart, and he didn't seem to have any noble character. It's a limited view, right? So, and you're remembering that he's dealing with some hardcore racists, but it makes sense that he would have chose that choice. Shall gain what many men desire. And Aragon is smart enough at least to point out that that doesn't mean much, right? Tons of people desire garbage stuff, so that doesn't mean that choice is worthwhile, right? Remember that, at least in my view, Portia is not worthwhile. So many men might desire Portia, and that's true at least from the actions of this play, because 3 suitors do go to her to try, and they fail. 2 of them fail, 1 succeeds. The second silver is, who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves. Now, in a real estimation of the play, Bassanio and Portia are garbage characters. They're not principled. They don't have any sort of true nobility. One of them is a hanger-on, and another one is a racist who commits legal fraud. So that's the one that Aragon chooses, and he doesn't get that. So we don't know enough about Aragon, right? Silver would be true if Bassanio were to choose it, because as much as he deserves, I mean, in one sense, these are one of those ironic interpretations, right? Because he doesn't deserve anything. In Venetian society, he gets a lot of things, and he does almost nothing. In terms of character, he deserves Portia because they're both garbage. So that would be true. So in a certain sense, if there were poetic truth in the inscriptions, then it would make more sense for Bassanio to choose silver. Again, he didn't have a lot. There's no indications that he really read the inscriptions. He was looking at the appearances, which is consistent with who he is. He's someone concerned with appearances. But for Bassanio to choose lead is insane. If there were the state of poetic truth being true, right? Lead is, who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath. Now, he gave and hazarded nothing. It's absurd. It's an absurd choice. If he had read the inscriptions, or if there were poetical truth to those inscriptions, it makes no sense that Bassanio would choose lead based on that description, because he did not give or hazard anything. He gave and hazarded Antonio, risking his life in addition to all the wealth he had borrowed. So it makes no sense that would be true. It would be more true for Bassanio to choose silver, because as much as he deserves, that brings in the other layer of equality. Then if you remove the inscriptions and think about if Bassanio were just using the appearances of the chests, then if you're looking at all the rest of his actions throughout the play, it would only make sense that his character would have chosen gold. He would have chosen the appearance. So you could say that either he was coached, and that's one theory, right? The song rhyming in words, ending in words that rhyme with lead. That's one clue. Or my hypothesis, and this is a little bit radical, is that before each suitor chose, Portia and or Nerissa replaced the contents of each box with failures in every box for Morocco and Aragon and successes for Bassanio. And that seems maybe a little elaborate, but you got to imagine this person within the same week is willing to commit legal fraud to completely screw over a stranger on behalf of her husband. So would she, in that same week, be willing to commit fraud on a game where there are no real consequences, no consequences of principle? Well, she is compromising her principle, but no consequences from any kind of legal or political standpoint. Would she be willing to do that to get what she wants, this husband who she likes for really no reason other than he's attractive? So for me, yeah, she is absolutely ready to commit fraud And the way she would do that was before the Prince of Morocco comes, right? He announced his intention to play the game. So she replaced the contents of every box before he chose with failure inscriptions, and they might have had several ones pointed up. The first clue to that is the fact that she has a little jab in there about cold. Your suit is cold. Possibly double meaning, right? Your suit is cold, like the northern climes that you were comparing yourself to, say you're just as good as people from the north, right, in the cold climates. And also your suit, your case, your pursuit of me is cold. Screw you, buddy. How dare you think you ever had a chance? I would never marry someone with your skin color. That's what her mindset was. So is someone capable of fraud, legally capable of doing that to screw over a dude she absolutely would not want to marry? Absolutely. Aragon is kind of a middle-of-the-road wash. I would say she probably would do the same thing. She would replace every single one so that no matter what Morocco or Aragon chose, they would have failed. And similarly, Bassani, this guy is not smart. In certain sense, he's crazy smart because he does nothing, and now he's super wealthy, but he's married to this person who's terrible, right? So depends on your view, right? In the I like to say more civilized view, he's done nothing. He's a buffoon. There's no reason to think he's intelligent at all, except he's smart enough to play the game, and he wins the game. But are we trusting him to be able to choose the correct chest? No, not at all. Also worth pointing out, would he have lived up to the principles of the game had he not won? Absolutely not. No way. No, he's wooing another lady that week, right? So that's, there's more to be said. I didn't go into the literary analysis because I've been recording for a couple hours now. I'm going to trim it down and all that. I'll put up more episodes. I think next might be Measure for Measure. That'll complement this play because it's good. It's a great play as well. Underappreciated. I think I call them. I think that they can be rightfully considered advanced tragedies. Simple tragedies being more like Hamlet and Macbeth, or Othello. And these are more complex. There's more to unravel. It's a big Gordian knot of a play. I will play you out with the same recording of that Souvenirs from Florence, U.S. Army Band. You can listen to the full thing, and if you want to go on, I'm sure you can go on YouTube. The Felix Mendelssohn Songs Without Words, the Gondola song, is a nice compliment to Merchant of Venice. But we'll leave you with this. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing with this long discussion. I may find a way to have some complimentary written pieces because I have written on this subject just so you can go back and look at some of it. Please do. Respond. Let me know what you think. Neyland Cross, NEYLAND CROSS at Hotmail. Send me your thoughts on my thoughts here. Look at some modern views of this play and read the play. Tell me if my theory still holds up after you read it. And then if you're feeling really fun, really excited, watch a version and see how much of what I would say the incorrect view, how much that can influence how everything's portrayed. And then try and imagine how you would do it if you were to do it based on this hypothesis. And you'll see that could provide for you a little bit of a window into the difficulties of the humanities field and how much work we have to do to really regain a standard of competence and analysis in the humanities field. And just know that that's something I'm working on. If you'd like to join me, I'd love to have you join me in that effort because I think it's important. We need to play the long game as human civilization. We need to have deep thinking about deep issues. So with that, I'll sign off. This is the second episode. Thank you for joining me on Fool Podcast My name is Spencer Cross. Goodbye. Bye.